The metallic clang of bars in the Marion Correctional Facility echoed through the corridors every morning at 6:30. Frank Johnson had been waking up to that sound for 3 years, and every morning it reminded him of how much time he had left before his release, 2 years and 4 months. In a cell measuring 3 by 4 meters, Frank shared the space with Dave Crowley, a small-time drug dealer from Cleveland. Dave snored until noon, which suited Frank. He preferred silence for his morning reflections. At 52, Frank still had the sturdy build of a mechanic, broad shoulders, calloused hands, and a scar on his right hand from an accident at a factory 20 years ago. "Johnson, mail!" shouted security guard Wilson, tossing a white envelope through the bars. Frank picked up the letter from the concrete floor. He would have recognized Rita's handwriting among 1,000 others. Rounded letters, slightly slanted to the left. His ex-wife rarely wrote, usually only on holidays or when she needed money for his prison account. He carefully opened the envelope with a homemade knife made from a sharpened toothbrush. "Frank, I need to tell you something about Andrew. He's living as a woman now. He goes by Alex. I know it's a shock, but he's happy. He works at a library and rents an apartment on Main Street. Don't be angry. I just wanted you to know. Rita." Frank read the letter 3 times. The words blurred before his eyes. "Lives as a woman. Calls herself Alex." His hands began to shake with rage that rose from deep within his stomach like lava from a volcano. "Hey Frank, are you okay?" Dave finally woke up and saw his cellmate's pale face. "Shut up!" Frank hissed, crumpling the letter in his fist. He remembered Andrew at 10 years old, a skinny boy who preferred books to football but was still his son. Frank had taught him how to change the oil in the car, shown him how to hold a wrench, dreamed that his son would carry on the family business. Andrew was quiet, but Frank blamed that on his mother's influence. On the same day, 200 kilometers from the prison, Alex Johnson was arranging books on the shelves of the Green Valley Public Library. At 24, she was a slender woman of average height, with long brown hair that she wore in a neat ponytail while she worked. The hormone therapy she had started 2 years ago had softened her features, but she still sometimes saw echoes of the old Andrew in the mirror. "Alex, we have some new arrivals on local history," said Dolores Payne, the head librarian, a woman in her 60s with a kind heart and a sharp mind. "I'll get to it, Mrs. Payne." Alex loved her job. The library was a quiet refuge where people came for knowledge, not judgment. Most of the residents of Green Valley had accepted her transformation with understanding, or at least polite indifference. Of course, there were those who whispered behind her back or openly expressed their disapproval, but they were in the minority. "Alex, phone for you," Dolores called from her office. "Hi, Mom." Alex recognized Rita's voice before she introduced herself. "Hi, sweetie. Listen, I wrote your father a letter. I told him about the changes in you." Alex felt her stomach clench into a knot. "Why did you do that?" "He needed to know. He'll find out eventually, and it's better that he's prepared." "Mom, you know how he feels about these things. Remember what he said about the neighbor boy who—" "I remember," Rita interrupted. "But he's your father. Maybe he's changed over the years." Alex knew her mother well enough to understand that Rita didn't believe her own words. Frank Johnson was an old-fashioned man who saw the world in black and white, right and wrong. Compromise and shades of gray were not in his vocabulary. That evening in prison, Frank lay on his narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling. His dinner was untouched. His stomach couldn't handle any food. Fragments of memories swirled in his head. How he taught Andrew to shave, how they watched baseball together, how the boy helped him in the garage. It's all Rita's fault, he thought. She was always too soft on the boy. She let him read instead of playing football. And now look, Dave was snoring on the bunk next to him, but Frank didn't hear him. He was making plans. He'd had plenty of time in prison to work out every detail. Prisoners were transported to court every week. The guards weren't very vigilant. Budget cuts had affected everything. Frank knew that escaping from prison would add another 10 years to his sentence, but that didn't matter anymore. Some things were more important than personal freedom. Family honor, traditions, the order of things, all of that had to be protected. He pulled a photo from under his mattress, taken 17 years ago. Himself, Rita, and 5-year-old Andrew in front of their house on Cherry Street. The boy was smiling, hugging his father around the neck. In the photo, they looked like a happy family. Where did I go wrong? Frank thought, running his finger over his son's face in the photo. He remembered his last conversation with Andrew before his arrest. The boy was 19 and had just started college. Frank was drunk after another fight with Rita and said a lot of things he shouldn't have. Andrew left home that night and never came back. But I'll fix everything, Frank whispered into the darkness of his cell. I'll make everything the way it should be. The next morning, Alex woke up from a nightmare. She dreamed that someone was knocking on her apartment door, but when she opened it, there was no one there, only a long shadow on the threshold. The dream was so realistic that she lay in bed for several minutes, listening to the sounds of the house. The apartment on the second floor of an old Victorian house was small but cozy. Alex had been renting it for 2 years, ever since she had finally transitioned to living as a woman. Her landlady, an elderly widow named Mrs. Connor, treated her with motherly care and never asked any unnecessary questions. At breakfast, Alex browsed the local news on her tablet. Nothing much ever happened in Green Valley. The opening of a new store, school sports achievements, minor traffic accidents. The quiet life of a small town was one of the reasons she had decided to stay here after her parents' divorce. A phone call interrupted her thoughts. Alex, it's Tommy. Want to grab dinner tonight? I have some news. Tommy Harris had been her best friend since childhood. He taught history at the local high school and was one of the first people to support her when she began her transition. Unlike many of the townspeople, Tommy never asked awkward questions or made comments. Sure, what time? 7 o'clock at Sally's. And Alex, be careful. My aunt works at the prison administration. She says your father has been acting strange lately. Very quiet, but tense. Alex felt a chill in her chest. What does that mean? I don't know. Maybe nothing. Just be careful. After talking to Tommy, Alex sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring out the window at the empty street. Green Valley was waking up slowly. The school bus drove by, the Martinez's grocery store opened, and a few neighbors came out to walk their dogs. She walked over to the mirror in the hallway and critically examined her reflection. Her makeup was neat, her clothes appropriate for the occasion, a simple blouse and knee-length skirt. To most people, she looked like a normal young woman on her way to work. But what would her father see in her when they met? Thursday, March 15th. It was a day for transporting prisoners to the county courthouse at the Marion Correctional Facility. Frank Johnson had been preparing for this moment for 3 weeks, studying every detail of the procedure. He knew that guards Thompson and Rodriguez had been working together for 2 years. He knew that Thompson was diabetic and usually felt tired by noon, and he knew the exact time of the bus stops and the route. Johnson, get ready! Court! Guard Wilson shouted at 8:30 a.m. Frank slowly got up from his bunk, put on his prison uniform, and held out his hands for the handcuffs. In 3 years of imprisonment, he had never broken the rules, never been in a fight, never caused any trouble. He had methodically built up a reputation as a model prisoner. On the prison bus, he was seated in the 3rd row on the right. Next to him sat Carlos Mendez, a petty thief who was nervously tapping his foot on the floor. There were 12 prisoners in total on the bus, along with 2 guards and the driver. Frank knew every mile of the road from the prison to the courthouse. 40 minutes after departure, the bus was supposed to pass an abandoned gas station on Highway 23. There, behind the rusty tanks, he had hidden a sharpened metal plate 3 months earlier during his previous trip to court. At 9:47 a.m., the bus slowed down near a roadwork sign. Frank looked out the window. Workers were indeed repairing the asphalt 50 meters from the gas station. Perfect cover. I feel sick, he groaned suddenly, clutching his stomach. I think it's my heart. Thompson turned around. What's going on, Johnson? I can't breathe. My chest hurts. Frank fell to the floor between the seats, pretending to have a heart attack. Rodriguez bent over him, checking his pulse. At that moment, Frank straightened up abruptly and headbutted the guard in the nose. The crack of breaking bone drowned out the cries of the other prisoners. Stop the bus! Thompson shouted, grabbing his radio. But Frank had already snatched the handcuff keys from the disoriented Rodriguez. In a matter of seconds, he freed himself, opened the emergency exit, and jumped out of the moving bus. The asphalt hit his body painfully, but Frank rolled over and got to his feet. Workers on the road shouted something unintelligible. The bus stopped 100 meters ahead. Frank ran toward an abandoned gas station, ignoring the pain in his left shoulder. Behind some rusty tanks, he found a hidden metal plate and stuck it into the lock of an old service room. The door gave way. Inside, wrapped in plastic, lay civilian clothes: jeans, a shirt, sneakers, and a baseball cap. Frank changed in 2 minutes, throwing his prison uniform into a tank of used oil. 1,000 meters from the gas station, behind a strip of woods, the motorcycle he had stolen 2 days earlier was waiting for him. Frank knew he had at most an hour before all the cops in the county would be on his tail. At that moment, in Green Valley, Alex was sorting returned books at the library. It was a quiet morning, with only a few visitors, mostly retirees reading newspapers and students preparing for exams. "Alex, can you help Mrs. Evans find some gardening books?" asked Dolores Payne. Mrs. Evans was a regular visitor to the library, a woman in her 70s who grew the best tomatoes in town. She always addressed Alex politely, using the correct pronouns, which meant more than those around her could understand. "Of course, Mrs. Evans. Are you looking for something in particular? I want to try growing orchids. I hear they're very difficult." While Alex was helping her find the right books, Rita Johnson entered the library. Her mother looked worried, clutching her purse nervously. "Mom, what are you doing here? Don't you have to be at work? Alex, we need to talk right now." They went into the staff room behind the reception desk. Rita closed the door and turned to her daughter with a serious expression on her face. "I got a call from the prison administration. Your father escaped this morning." Alex felt the blood drain from her face. "What do you mean, escaped?" "He attacked the guards while being transported to court. The police are looking for him, but so far without success." Rita took her daughter by the hands. "Alex, I think he might come here." "Here? Why would he? You know your father. When he makes up his mind, nothing can stop him. And after my letter..." Alex sank into a chair. Over the years of living apart from her father, she had almost forgotten his quick temper, how he could fly into a rage over trifles. But now the memories came flooding back. The broken plate after his favorite team lost, the broken door after a fight with a neighbor, the bruise on Rita's arm after a particularly hard day at work. "What should I do, Mom?" "We're going to the police. Right now." The Green Valley Police Department was located in an old brick building on 1st Street. Detective Kaylee Miller was sorting through a bicycle theft case when Rita and Alex Johnson knocked on the door. Kaylee had been with the police for 15 years, the last 5 as a detective. At 38, she was an experienced investigator, but cases in Green Valley rarely went beyond burglaries or domestic disputes. Prison breaks were unheard of in her line of work. "Detective Miller, my name is Rita Johnson. This is my daughter, Alex. We've been told that my ex-husband has escaped from prison." Kaylee looked closely at the women. Rita looked frightened but determined. Alex seemed more fragile, nervously fiddling with the strap of her purse. "Have a seat. Tell me everything from the beginning." Rita began with the story of their divorce, explained why Frank had been imprisoned, and told her about the letter she had sent 3 weeks ago. When she got to Alex's transformation, Kaylee noticed the girl tense up. "Mrs. Johnson, what reason do you have to believe that your ex-husband would come here?" "Detective, you don't know Frank. When he thinks someone has dishonored his family, he'll stop at nothing." Alex spoke for the first time. "He always said he'd rather have a dead son than..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Kaylee quickly jotted it down in her notebook. As the mother of a 14-year-old teenager, she understood the complexities of family relationships, but threats of physical violence were a different matter entirely. "Miss Johnson, do you have anywhere you can stay for a few days? Relatives? Friends?" "I can stay with Tommy Harris. He's a childhood friend." "Okay, I'll contact the prison administration and find out the details of the escape. I'll also put extra patrols around your home and work." After the women left, Kaylee called the Marion Correctional Facility. The head of security, Lieutenant Ryan, provided details of the escape. "Johnson planned this, Detective. He hasn't had any impulsive violations in 3 years. He studied routes, times, and weak spots in security. We found maps and notes in his cell. Where could he be headed? According to our information, he has connections in Green Valley. His ex-wife and child live there. We've already sent out a bulletin to all nearby precincts. 200 kilometers from Green Valley, Frank stopped the stolen motorcycle near an abandoned farm. He knew this place. He often came here with his grandfather to fish when he was a child. The old house had been empty for 10 years, but the roof didn't leak, and the basement would be a good place to wait out the first few days of the search. Frank went down to the basement and took out some canned food, water, and old clothes that he had stashed there a few months earlier during a short leave from prison to attend his uncle's funeral. That was when he had stolen the motorcycle and hidden it in the barn. A map of Ohio hung on the basement wall. Frank circled Green Valley in red marker. It was 150 kilometers of country roads to his home, which he knew by heart. "Andrew," he whispered, looking at his son's photo. "I'll fix this mistake. I'll give you back your manhood." In his distorted view of reality, Frank saw his son's transformation not as a personal choice, but as an illness that could be cured with decisive action. Prison culture only reinforced his prejudices. Conversations with fellow inmates, many of whom shared his views, convinced him that his planned actions were correct. Frank took a homemade knife out of his backpack, a sharpened metal strip with a handle wrapped in electrical tape. In prison, such weapons were called stabs. He tested the sharpness of the blade several times on a piece of wood. That evening, Alex sat in Tommy Harris's living room, sipping tea and trying to calm down. Tommy's house was a cozy place. Bookshelves from floor to ceiling, soft armchairs, and a fireplace that created a sense of security. "You can stay here as long as you like," Tommy said, sitting down in the armchair opposite her. "I have a spare bedroom and I'll feel better knowing you're not alone." "Tommy, what if he really comes? What if—" "Don't think about it. The police will find him. Besides, he probably doesn't even plan on coming here. Maybe he just wanted some freedom." But Alex knew her father better than she wanted to. Frank Johnson never did anything without a purpose. If he ran away after receiving the letter about her transformation, then he had specific plans. Tommy's phone rang at 10:30 p.m. Detective Miller was on the other end. "Mr. Harris, this is Detective Miller. Frank Johnson has been spotted at a gas station 30 miles outside of town. We're stepping up patrols, but I recommend that you and Miss Johnson stay home unless absolutely necessary." After the call, Tommy turned to Alex with a serious expression. "He's close, very close." That same night, in the woods near Green Valley, Frank set up a small camp. He had known these places since childhood. Every trail, every ravine, every clearing. The police could patrol the roads, but in the woods he felt at home. Frank took out his binoculars and looked toward the city. The lights of the houses looked like stars in the night sky. Somewhere out there, in one of those houses, lived the man he still considered his son. Friday, March 16th, 5:47 a.m. Frank Johnson woke up in a makeshift shelter of branches and tarpaulin that he had built in a ravine 2 kilometers from Green Valley. The dampness penetrated his clothes, and his left shoulder, bruised during his escape, ached with every movement. But the discomfort didn't matter. Today, for the first time in 5 years, he would see his hometown. Through his binoculars, Frank watched Green Valley wake up. Dog owners were the first to take to the streets, followed by shops opening. The school bus drove along the familiar route, the same one Andrew used to take. At 7:15 a.m., Frank saw a police car slowly patrolling Main Street. Another one drove down Cherry Street, the street where their family home once stood. The house had been sold after the divorce, but Frank remembered every room, every corner. "They're looking for me," he smiled. "But they don't know these places like I do." Frank took a thermos of coffee and sandwiches he had prepared at an abandoned farm out of his backpack. He had enough food for 3 days, but he planned to finish everything sooner. Much sooner. He took a crumpled photograph out of his pocket, the same one from 17 years ago. 5-year-old Andrew was laughing, sitting on his father's shoulders. Back then, everything was simple. Father, son, a future that seemed predictable. "Where did I lose you, son?" Frank whispered, running his finger over the child's face in the photograph. At 8:30 in the morning, he saw a woman coming out of the library through his binoculars. Long brown hair, slim figure, cautious gait. Frank's heart stopped. It was Andrew. his son. But Frank could hardly recognize his child in this woman. Hormones had changed his facial features, his mannerisms, even his posture. What he saw contradicted everything he believed about nature and the order of things. "What have they done to you?" Frank clenched his fist so tightly that his knuckles turned white. At that moment, Alex felt someone watching her. Passing by the library on her way to Tommy's house, she looked back several times but saw nothing suspicious. Nevertheless, the feeling wouldn't leave her, as if someone was watching her from the woods, from the shadows between the houses. Paranoia, she told herself, but quickened her pace. Breakfast and the latest news were waiting for her at Tommy's house. The local radio station reported on an escaped convict, without naming names, but Alex knew they were talking about her father. The police are asking residents of Green Valley and surrounding areas to be cautious. The suspect is considered extremely dangerous. If you see him, do not approach him. Call 911 immediately. "Turn it off, please," Alex asked. "I can't listen to this." Tommy turned off the radio and sat down next to her at the kitchen table. "How did you sleep?" "I hardly slept. Every sound seemed suspicious." Alex rubbed her tired eyes. "Tommy, what if he finds me? What if—" "There are no what-ifs." Detective Miller promised extra security. "Besides, your father doesn't know where you're staying." But Alex remembered her father as a determined and resourceful man. If he was determined to find her, he would. At 9 a.m., Detective Miller called. "Miss Johnson, we have some new information. Your father was seen near an old quarry on the north side of town. We're combing the area, but so far without luck. I strongly recommend that you stay where you are." "Detective, how long could this go on?" "It's hard to say, but we'll find him. He doesn't have the resources to stay on the run for long." After the call, Alex went to the window and looked out at the street. The quiet residential neighborhood looked peaceful. Trimmed lawns, white picket fences, children riding bikes. It was hard to believe that somewhere nearby a man wanted her dead. At the police station, Detective Kaylee Miller studied a map of the area, marking with red dots the places where Frank Johnson had been seen. The pattern was clear. He was moving toward the city center, using wooded areas and ravines for cover. "Smart bastard," Kaylee muttered. "He knows this area like the back of his hand." Sergeant Bill Connor, a 20-year veteran, approached her desk with coffee and a donut. "Kaylee, I talked to some of the old-timers. Johnson grew up here, knows every trail in the woods. He used to hunt with his grandfather when he was a kid. If he wants to stay hidden, he can hide for weeks." "We don't have weeks, Bill. The longer he's out there, the more dangerous the situation becomes." Kaylee studied Frank Johnson's personnel file. Aggravated assault. He beat a man in a bar with a metal ashtray after an argument about politics. Prior to that, there were several incidents of domestic violence, which Rita refused to report. His psychological profile indicated anger management issues and rigid thinking. "Bill, what do you know about the Johnson family?" "Not much. Frank worked as a mechanic at an auto repair shop on Industrial Street. He was a good mechanic, but he had a difficult personality. Rita put up with his behavior for years before she filed for divorce. As for the child," Bill hesitated. "Speak up." "To be honest, most people in town are fine with Alex. She's quiet, polite, and a good worker. But there are those who, well, you know, especially among the older generation." Kaylee nodded. She had grown up in a small town herself and knew how slowly people's attitudes changed. But prejudice was one thing, and murder was quite another. "I need a list of all of Johnson's friends and acquaintances. He may try to contact someone." At noon, Frank left his hideout in the ravine and moved closer to the city. He knew the police were combing the forest area, but he also knew places where they wouldn't find him. Old basements of abandoned houses, drainage pipes under bridges, hunting huts built decades ago. His first stop was the house on Cherry Street where his family had once lived. The new owners had painted the fence blue and planted flower beds where Frank used to park his car. The changes angered him. Strangers had altered what had belonged to his family. Frank climbed over the back fence and hid in a shed, which, fortunately, had been left untouched. From there, he could watch the street and plan his next move. At 1:20 p.m., he saw a familiar figure, Rita walking home from work. His ex-wife had aged. Her hair had turned gray, but Frank would have recognized her gait among 1,000. She looked back several times, clearly nervous. "Are you afraid of me, Rita?" Frank whispered. "You should be." He could have approached her now, forced her to tell him where Andrew was hiding. But that would have been foolish. Too many witnesses, too high a risk. He had to wait for the right moment. At 2 p.m., Frank left the barn and headed for the library. If Rita had written the truth, Andrew was working there. Frank wanted to see with his own eyes what had become of his son. The library was located in an old Victorian building on the central square. Frank remembered bringing 5-year-old Andrew here for children's books. The boy loved adventure stories and dreamed of becoming an explorer or archaeologist. Hiding behind the trees in the city park opposite the library, Frank focused his binoculars on the windows of the building. At 2:30 p.m., he saw Alex behind the registration desk, helping an elderly woman with some books. Frank studied his child's face for a long time. Her features had softened and become more feminine. Her movements had also changed. They were smoother, more cautious. He couldn't hear her voice, but from the movement of her lips, he could tell that Alex was speaking softly and politely. "That's not my son," Frank whispered, lowering his binoculars. "My son is dead. This is something else." In his distorted perception, Alex's transformation was not personal development, but a corruption, a disease that needed to be cured by radical means. The prison subculture, where any deviation from the strict norms of masculinity was punished with violence, only reinforced these beliefs. At 3 p.m., Alex's workday at the library ended. She said goodbye to Dolores Payne and left through the staff entrance, as agreed with Detective Miller. Tommy was waiting for her in his car in the parking lot. "How was your day?" he asked as Alex got into the car. "Strange. I felt like I was being watched all day. Maybe it's just nerves." Detective Miller called. "They found traces of a fire in the ravine near the cemetery. Your father is definitely somewhere nearby." Alex looked in the side mirror. The park across from the library looked empty, but the shadows between the trees could hide anything. "Tommy, what if I leave town? At least for a while." "Where would you go? And for how long?" "No one knows how long this situation will last. I have a cousin in Columbus. I could—" "Alex, you can't run away your whole life. Besides, what if he follows you? It'll be harder to protect you in a big city." Tommy was right, but fear paralyzed Alex's ability to think rationally. Every shadow, every unexpected sound made her flinch. At home, Tommy turned on all the outside lights and closed the curtains. They ordered pizza, but Alex hardly ate anything. At 7 p.m., Rita called. "Honey, how are you? I've been worried all day." "I'm fine, Mom. Everything's fine so far. How are you?" "I moved in with my sister Linda. The detective said it would be safer." "Alex, I feel so guilty for writing that letter to him." "Mom, don't blame yourself. He would have found out sooner or later." After talking to her mother, Alex sat down by the window despite the closed curtains. Somewhere out there in the darkness was the man who had once read her bedtime stories, taught her to ride a bike, and promised to always protect her. "How things have changed," she thought. "When I was little, Dad was my hero. And now—" At 8:30 p.m., Frank left the park and headed for Tommy Harris's house. He had found the address easily by looking in the phone book at the library while Alex was at work. He remembered Tommy Harris as a skinny boy who had been friends with Andrew in high school. Frank always thought he seemed too soft, not manly enough. Tommy's house was on a quiet street in the old part of town. Frank approached from the back, hiding between garages and fences. All the lights were on, and the curtains were drawn tight. Frank took up a position behind a large oak tree in a neighbor's yard. From there, he could watch the house without risking being seen. He clutched a homemade knife in his hand. Tomorrow, he decided, he would finish what he had started. At 9:15 p.m., a police car pulled up outside the house. The patrol officer got out, walked around the perimeter of the house, talked to someone on his radio, and got back in the car. Half an hour later, the car drove away. "Security," Frank smiled. "But they can't guard it around the clock." He knew the local police schedule. There were only 2 patrol officers on night duty for the entire city. They couldn't be on duty at one house all the time. At 10 p.m., the lights in Tommy's house began to go out. First the kitchen, then the living room. The last light to go out was in the bedroom on the second floor. That was probably where Alex was staying. Frank took out his binoculars and focused on the dark windows. Behind one of them, his child was sleeping, a person he could no longer consider his son, but could not accept as his daughter. That same night, Detective Kaylee Miller sat at the station, studying maps and patrol reports. There had been 6 reports of suspicious persons during the day, but all of them turned out to be false alarms. "He's smarter than I thought," she said to Sergeant Connor. "He only moves at night and knows where the surveillance cameras are hidden." "Kaylee, maybe we should ask the county for help, or call in the K9 unit?" "I already did, but the dogs won't be here until tomorrow morning. Until then." The phone rang at 11:45 p.m. It was dispatcher Mary Simpson. "Detective, we just got a call from a resident on Maple Street. She says she saw a man hiding near the Harris house." Kaylee grabbed her jacket and badge. "Bill, let's go and call for backup." 10 minutes later, 2 police cars pulled up quietly to Tommy's house with their lights off. Kaylee took out her flashlight and radio. "Team 1, go around the front. Team 2, go around the back. Be careful, the suspect is armed." They began to comb the yard, shining their flashlights under every bush and behind every tree. Kaylee found flattened grass under an oak tree and a cigarette butt. "He was here," she said into the radio. "Very recently. Reinforced security at the house. Don't let anyone in or out without permission." But Frank had already disappeared into the night, like a ghost who knew every corner of his hometown. Saturday, March 17th, 6:15 a.m. Frank Johnson had not slept all night, moving between hiding places he had known since childhood. After the police discovered his ambush near Tommy's house, he realized he had little time left. Every hour of delay increased his chances of being caught. Now he was sitting in the basement of an abandoned house on Elm Street, studying a map of the library he had drawn from memory on a piece of cardboard. Frank remembered the layout of the building from when he used to take little Andrew there. The main entrance, the service exit, the basement with the boiler room, the staircase to the second floor with the old archives. "Today is Saturday," he whispered, checking the blade of his homemade knife. "The library is open until 6. Fewer visitors, fewer witnesses." Frank took the last of his canned food out of his backpack and ate mechanically, tasting nothing. His body needed energy for what was about to happen. In his twisted mind, what he was planning was not murder, but an act of mercy, freeing his son from the disease that had distorted his nature. At 7:30 a.m., he left his hideout and headed for the city center. Saturday traffic had already begun on the streets. People were going to cafes, shops, and about their usual business. No one paid any attention to the middle-aged man in work clothes and a baseball cap. At Tommy Harris's house, Alex woke up from a nightmare. She had dreamed that she was locked in a dark room, and someone was slowly turning the key in the door. When she woke up, she couldn't figure out where she was for a few seconds until she saw the familiar bookshelves in Tommy's guest room. "Alex, are you okay?" Tommy knocked on the door. "Yeah, just a bad dream." They hardly spoke at breakfast. Tommy glanced out the window from time to time, even though the curtains were closed. Alex drank her coffee mechanically, but her hands were shaking and the cup clinked against the saucer. At 8:45, Detective Miller called. "Miss Johnson, I need to tell you something. Last night, your father was near Mr. Harris's house. We found evidence of his presence." Alex felt the blood drain from her face. "Does he know where I am?" "Possibly, but we've increased security. I recommend you don't leave the house today." "Detective, how long can this go on? I can't stay locked up forever." "I understand how you feel, but your safety is our priority. We've called in additional resources, including K9 units. I think we'll have him by the end of the day." After the conversation, Alex sank into a chair by the fireplace. Tommy sat down next to her and took her hand. "Everything will be fine. The police know what they're doing." "Tommy, I can't live like this anymore. Every sound makes me jump. I feel like I'm trapped. Want to play chess? Or read something? You need to take your mind off things." But Alex couldn't concentrate on anything. Memories of her childhood were spinning in her head. How her father taught her to ride a bike. How they built things together. How he read her bedtime stories. That man seemed completely different from the one who was now hunting her. At 11 a.m., Detective Kaylee Miller coordinated the search from the temporary headquarters set up in the City Hall. On the table was a map of the city with marked locations where Frank Johnson had been seen or was believed to be. The K-9 unit combed the wooded area near the cemetery, Sergeant Connor reported. They found signs that someone had camped there, but he's gone. The dogs lost the trail near the creek. Smart bastard, Keeley muttered, using water to throw the dogs off the trail. All possible hiding places were marked with red dots on the map. Abandoned houses, sheds, basements, sewer drains. Frank could be hiding in any of them. Detective, young Officer Davis addressed her. I talked to some old-timers. They say Johnson knew all the secret places in town when he was a kid. There are old Cold War bomb shelters, abandoned mines. Mark everything you found on the map. Kaylee knew she was playing cat and mouse with a man who had the advantage of knowing the area. But she had the advantage of resources and technology. Bill, how's our security at Harris's house? A patrol car every half hour, plus Officer Johnson is on stakeout across the street. That's not enough. Send 2 more there, and don't let anyone leave their post without a replacement. At 2:30 p.m., Alex couldn't stand the confined space any longer. Tommy, I need to get out. At least for half an hour. Alex, the detective said, I'm going crazy. I need some fresh air. I need to move around. Tommy hesitated, but he could see that the isolation was having a devastating effect on Alex. Okay, but only in the yard, and I'll stay close. They went out into the backyard. Alex took a deep breath of the March air and felt the sun's rays on her face. The simple pleasures she had taken for granted now seemed precious. Tommy, remember how we used to play in this yard when we were kids? Sure. You always won at hide and seek. You found places I never looked for you. I wonder if Dad remembers those days, or if I've become a stranger to him. Through the fence came the sounds of a normal Saturday afternoon. Dogs barking, children laughing, the sound of a lawnmower. The peaceful life of a small town, which seemed so far away from the nightmare of the last few days. At 3 p.m., they returned to the house. Alex felt a little better, but her anxiety had not gone away. You know what? She said to Tommy. I want to go to the library. What? Alex, are you crazy? I need to pick up some things from my desk. Personal photos, documents. If something happens, I don't want to lose them. It's too dangerous. The detective said they almost caught him. Besides, the library is in the city center. It's full of people. I'll only be there for 15 minutes. Tommy understood that Alex needed to feel some control over the situation. Okay, but I'm coming with you, and we'll call Detective Miller first. Kaylee was against it, but finally agreed on the condition that a police officer accompany them. 15 minutes, no more, and Officer Davis is going with you. At 4:45 p.m., Frank watched from the park behind the library. Saturday wasn't the busiest day. There were few visitors, mostly students and retirees. He noticed a police car parked near the main entrance. Security, he thought. So they're waiting for me. At 5:15 p.m., Tommy's car and another police car pulled up to the library. Frank saw Alex get out of Tommy's car, accompanied by a young officer in uniform. Frank's heart began to race. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. Alex had come to him. Frank knew the library like the back of his hand. There was one detail the police didn't know about: an old service tunnel connecting the library basement to the neighboring City Hall building. The tunnel had been built in the 1950s during the Cold War paranoia, but had been forgotten a decade later. While Alex and her security team entered through the main entrance, Frank headed for the City Hall building. He knew that the basement entrance from the alley was unguarded. Who would think of a half-century-old tunnel? The lock on the City Hall basement door gave way to a homemade lockpick in 3 minutes. Frank went down to the basement and found the bricked-up passageway he had opened the night before while preparing for the operation. The tunnel was narrow and damp, but passable. Frank crawled through it with a flashlight in his teeth, clutching a knife in his hand. Time was against him. Alex had said she would only be in the library for 15 minutes. In the library, Alex quickly gathered her personal belongings from her desk. Family photos, documents, small souvenirs, everything that made this place her home. Officer Davis stood nearby, glancing nervously from side to side. Miss Johnson, we really need to hurry. 5 more minutes, please. Tommy paced between the shelves, clearly nervous as well. Dolores Payne, the head librarian, had come in especially to open the building after hours. Alex, dear, take everything you need, and know that your workplace will always be waiting for you. At 5:35 p.m., they were done. Alex packed her things into a bag and headed for the exit. Officer Davis walked ahead, Tommy beside her. Wait, Alex said. I forgot to check the mailbox in the utility room. Alex, Tommy began. Just a second. There might be important documents there. She headed for the service door behind the reception desk. Davis hesitated, unsure whether to follow her or stay at the main entrance. I'll be quick, Alex called, disappearing through the door. The utility room was small, a few filing cabinets, employee mailboxes, and a staircase to the basement. Alex went to her box and began sorting through the mail. There was a soft creak behind her. Alex turned around and saw the basement door ajar. Strange. She was sure the door was closed. Probably a draft, she thought, and turned back to her mail. At that moment, Frank Johnson appeared from behind the door. Alex froze, unable to believe her eyes. Her father was standing 3 feet away from her, aged, thin, with a crazy gleam in his eyes. He was holding something metal in his hand. Dad? She whispered. Hello, Andrew. Frank's voice was hoarse but calm. It's time to go home. Alex took a step back, but there was a wall behind her. Dad, please. What have they done to you, son? Look at yourself. This isn't you. This is me. This has always been me. I just couldn't do it before. Shut up, Frank roared, then instantly lowered his voice. It's a disease, Andrew, but I'll fix it. He moved toward her, and Alex saw the knife in his hand. It was a homemade blade made of sharpened metal with a handle wrapped in electrical tape. Dad, don't! Please don't! Alex screamed at the top of her lungs. Tommy, help! Frank lunged at her. Alex tried to dodge him but tripped over a box of documents. Frank knocked her to the floor, covering her mouth with his hand. Be quiet. This won't take long. Alex scratched his face, trying to break free, but Frank was stronger. Prison training and years of physical labor gave him the advantage. He took his hand away from her mouth and grabbed her throat. Alex screamed again, but the sound came out hoarse. Strong fingers tightened, cutting off her air supply. Dad, please, she whispered, gasping for air. I'm sorry, but this is the only way. Frank squeezed his daughter's throat, staring into her eyes. In his twisted mind, he wasn't killing her. He was freeing his son from the disease that had ravaged his body and soul. Alex struggled, trying to push her father away, but her strength was leaving her. Her vision began to darken, and her ears rang. The last thing she saw was her father's face, contorted with a mixture of rage and mad love. Alex's arms fell limply. Her body stopped resisting. Frank unclenched his fingers and looked at his daughter's motionless face. For the first time in days of planning, he realized what he had done. What have I done? There were footsteps outside the door, and Tommy's voice, Alex? Alex, where are you? Frank jumped to his feet, grabbed the knife, and rushed to the window. Breaking the glass with the handle, he jumped out just as the utility room door swung open. Tommy saw only the broken window and Alex's motionless body on the floor. Alex! Tommy fell to his knees beside her, checking her pulse. Nothing. Officer Davis, over here, quick! Davis burst into the room with his gun drawn, saw the broken window and the body. What happened? He was here. Call an ambulance and Detective Miller. Immediately. Tommy began CPR and chest compressions, but he knew it was too late. Alex's neck was strangely bent, and there were dark marks from fingers on his throat. Where is he? Did you see him? Davis shouted into the radio. I don't know. When I came in, he was already gone. Only a broken window. 10 minutes later, the library was a crime scene. Detective Miller arrived with a team of forensic experts, and the medics pronounced Alex dead from suffocation. Kaylee stood over the body, her fists clenched. She had seen many deaths in her career, but this was particularly painful. A young woman killed by her own father because of prejudice and hatred. Bill, she said to Sergeant Connor, call in the intercept plan. All roads, all exits from the city. Check the hospitals. He may have injured himself jumping out of the window. Kaylee, we'll comb every house within a 5-kilometer radius. Do it. And double the reward for information about him. Tommy sat in the corner, his face covered with his hands. It's my fault. I should have insisted she didn't come. Mr. Harris, it's not your fault, Kaylee said. Only one person is to blame, and we're going to find him. Reports of the search came in over the radio. The dogs picked up a trail from the broken window, but lost it at a stream 200 meters from the library. Detective, the forensic scientist said to Kaylee, there's blood on the glass shards. He definitely cut himself. Kaylee looked at Alex one last time. The young woman was lying on the floor of the utility room, where she had come to collect her personal belongings. Now those belongings were evidence in a murder case. Tell the coroner to hurry up with the report. We have a killer to find. Sunday, March 18th, 3:30 a.m. Frank Johnson sat in an abandoned barn 5 kilometers from Green Valley, clutching a bleeding wound on his right arm. Shards of glass had cut through the skin to the bone when he jumped out of the library window. The pain was sharp, but that wasn't what hurt him the most. The last seconds of Alex's life replayed in his head, her frightened eyes, her hoarse voice begging for mercy. For the first time in 3 days of madness, Frank realized what he had done. He had killed his own child. Andrew, he whispered into the darkness of the barn. What have I done to you? Reality hit him with crushing force. There was no illness to cure. There was no liberation. There was only the death of an innocent person at the hands of his own father. Frank took the photograph out of his pocket, the same one from 17 years ago. 5-year-old Andrew was smiling, sitting on his father's shoulders. Now that child was dead, and he had been killed by the very man who had once promised to always protect him. The wound was bleeding, but Frank didn't even try to bandage it. Let the blood flow. Let the pain remind him of what he had done. At 4:15 a.m., he heard dogs barking in the distance. The dog handlers had picked up his trail. Frank could have kept running, but where and why? His life had ended the moment he had clasped his hands around his daughter's throat. At the police station, Detective Kaylee Miller was coordinating the largest operation in Green Valley's history. A map hung on the wall with search locations marked. Red crosses indicated locations that had been checked. Blue circles indicated places where blood had been found. The dogs are leading us to the old McDonald farm, Sergeant Connor reported over the radio. There's more blood. I think he's seriously injured. Be careful, Bill. A wounded animal is unpredictable. Kaylee hadn't slept in over 20 hours, but the adrenaline kept her from feeling tired. There had never been a case more important than this one in her career. A hate crime in a small town could set a precedent that would change the life of the entire community. Detective, Officer Davis addressed her. The media is demanding a statement. The reporters are already in town. No comments until the suspect is apprehended, and keep the journalists away from the crime scene. The phone rang at 4:45 a.m. It was dispatcher Mary Simpson. Detective, we have a call. A man is turning himself in. He says he's Frank Johnson. Frank walked down the main road toward the city center, making no attempt to hide. His right arm hung limply, blood dripping onto the asphalt from the wound. Behind him, he could hear dogs barking and the sound of engines. The search party was closing in. He reached the central square where the library stood and stopped. Yellow tape cordoned off the crime scene, and a police officer stood guard at the main entrance. Frank looked at the broken window of the utility room, evidence of his disgrace. Hands up, don't move. Frank turned around. 3 police cars surrounded him, officers aiming their guns at him. Detective Miller got out of one of the cars, holding her gun at the ready. Frank Johnson, you're under arrest on suspicion of murder, she said, her voice calm but firm. Frank raised his good arm. I'm not resisting. On your knees! Hands behind your head. Frank knelt down in the middle of the square, in the very spot where he had played as a child 30 years ago. Officer Davis came up behind him and handcuffed him. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court. Frank didn't listen. He stared at the bookcase where, just a few hours ago, he had killed the only thing he had left in this world. In the holding cell, Frank sat on a narrow cot, staring at the wall. The medic treated the wound on his arm and stitched it up, but Frank showed little reaction to the pain. Detective Miller entered the cell at 10 a.m. with a tape recorder and a folder of documents. "Mr. Johnson, are you ready to make a statement?" Frank slowly turned his head. "Is there any point?" "There's always a point, even now." Kaylee sat down in a chair opposite him and turned on the tape recorder. "Tell me what happened yesterday at the library." Frank was silent for several minutes, then spoke quietly. "I killed my child." "Why?" "I thought I was correcting a mistake. I thought I was saving him." Frank's voice trembled. "I was wrong. I killed an innocent man." "Did you plan the murder in advance?" "Yes. From the moment I received the letter from my ex-wife, I escaped from prison specifically for this purpose." Kaylee wrote down every word. A sincere confession would make the trial easier, but it would not lessen the severity of the crime. "Do you regret what you did?" Frank looked her in the eyes. "Every second. But it won't change anything. Alex is dead, and I killed her." Monday, March 19th. News of the murder in Green Valley spread throughout the state. Local and national media swarmed the small town, turning the tragedy into a media event. Tommy Harris stood outside the closed library, answering questions from reporters. He hadn't slept in 2 days, his face gaunt, but he felt compelled to tell the truth about Alex. "She was a kind person," he told the microphones. "She helped anyone who asked for help. She loved her job and cared about her mother. No one deserves to die like that." "Mr. Harris, how do you feel about transgender people?" asked a reporter from Columbus. "I treat them like people, just people who have the right to live and be happy." Rita Johnson did not give any interviews. She locked herself in her sister's house, mourning her daughter and cursing herself for the letter that led to the tragedy. The trial took place 3 months later, in June 2025. Frank Johnson did not hire a lawyer and pleaded guilty to all charges: first-degree murder, escape from custody, and assaulting a police officer. Judge Margaret Kelly, a woman in her 50s with 20 years of experience, conducted the trial with particular thoroughness. The case received national attention as an example of a hate crime against transgender people. "Defendant Frank Johnson," she said to him on the day of sentencing, "you took the life of your own child because of prejudice and hatred. This is not just murder. It is a denial of a human being's right to self-determination and dignity." Frank stood with his head bowed. 3 months in prison had left him gaunt and gray, looking older than his years. "Your daughter Alex was a courageous person who found the strength to live in accordance with her true nature. You took that opportunity away from her. I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." Tommy, Rita, and several Green Valley residents were present in the courtroom. No one applauded the sentence. Justice had been served, but Alex could not be brought back. A year after the tragedy, a memorial plaque was erected in Green Valley in honor of Alex Johnson. It is located in the park across from the library where she worked. The plaque is engraved with the words, "In memory of Alex Johnson, daughter, friend, librarian. Her courage changed our community." Tommy Harris became an activist for transgender rights. He regularly speaks at schools and universities, telling Alex's story and the importance of acceptance and tolerance. "Alex didn't die in vain if her story saves even one life," he says at meetings. "Hate always leads to tragedy. Only love and understanding can change the world." Detective Kaylee Miller was promoted and now works for the state police department, specializing in hate crimes. The Johnson case became her personal mission to protect those who are discriminated against. Rita Johnson moved to another city, but every year on Alex's birthday, she visits the memorial plaque. She brings flowers and spends several hours talking to her daughter. The Green Valley Library established the Alex Johnson Scholarship for young people studying library science. Her photo hangs on the wall of the main hall with the inscription, "Books bring people together." Frank Johnson is serving a life sentence in a maximum security prison. He has not filed any appeals, requested a transfer to another prison, or participated in any rehabilitation programs. He spends every day in solitary confinement reading letters from victims of similar crimes and their families. Some letters are full of hatred, others of remarkable compassion. All of them remind him of the price of prejudice. On the wall of his cell hangs a single photograph, the same one taken 17 years ago, showing 5-year-old Andrew smiling as he sits on his father's shoulders. Next to it is a newspaper clipping with a photo of Alex taken shortly before her death. A happy young woman who found herself but didn't get to live a full life. Frank writes letters he never sends. "Dear Alex, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know nothing can bring you back. But I want you to know that I understand my mistake. You were brave, honest, kind. You were exactly who you were meant to be. And I was a blind fool who couldn't see the beauty of your soul. I'm sorry, daughter, Dad." The letters lie in a box under the bunk bed. Hundreds of apologies that no one will ever read. Green Valley changed after the tragedy. The city passed an anti-discrimination law protecting the rights of LGBT+ residents. Schools introduced programs on tolerance and acceptance of diversity. The local church, which used to condemn transgender people, now holds services in memory of victims of hate crimes. Not all changes came easily. There were protests, arguments, and divided families. But most residents understood a simple truth: hatred only breeds suffering. Speaking at the anniversary of the tragedy, Mayor James Cole said, "We can't bring Alex back, but we can honor her memory by creating a community where every person can live safely and be themselves." Alex Johnson's story has become a symbol of the fight against transphobia across the country. Her name is spoken at human rights rallies, articles and books are written about her, and documentaries are made. But for those who knew her personally, she will always be just Alex, a kind girl who loved books, cared about people, and dreamed of a peaceful future. A future she was never given the chance to see. The tragedy in Green Valley reminds us that prejudice and hatred have faces, names, and families. They destroy not only the lives of their victims, but also the lives of those who commit them. Only acceptance, understanding, and love can break this vicious cycle. In a small town in Ohio, the memory of Alex Johnson lives on in every book read, in every act of kindness, in every decision to choose love over fear.